The packed sanctuary of Grace Community Church fell silent as Margaret Hayes rose to the pulpit, her voice carrying across every pew with unyielding conviction. "I will never stand by while the gay agenda invades our families and our faith," she declared, her eyes sweeping the congregation as heads nodded in agreement. 2 rows back, Oliver Thompson sat frozen, his fingers brushing those of Elijah Ramirez beneath the folded bulletin, the touch the only anchor keeping him from bolting out the side door. At 27, Oliver had built a careful life as an accountant in suburban Charlotte, North Carolina, commuting each day from the family home in Willow Creek while hiding the truth that had defined his quiet struggles since high school. Elijah, 29, had arrived from Atlanta 6 months earlier to teach history at the local high school, drawn by the promise of a slower pace and the chance to live openly without the constant spotlight of city activism. Their paths had crossed at the town farmers market when a shared love of old vinyl records led to coffee, then long walks, and finally the kind of connection that made Oliver question every boundary he had ever accepted. That evening after the service, Oliver and Elijah met at their usual spot by the lake, the sun still warm on the water. "I hate watching her say those things," Oliver admitted, his voice thick with the weight of years of Sunday mornings spent biting his tongue. Elijah squeezed his shoulder, the gesture steady and reassuring. "You are not what she condemns, you know that, right?" They had met when Elijah stopped at the market booth Oliver helped run for the church youth group, ironically enough. A simple conversation about a Bob Dylan album turned into hours of talking about books, dreams, and the quiet fears they both carried. Elijah had come out at 19 and built a life of quiet pride, but he understood the cost of hiding for someone like Oliver, raised in a home where faith and family were one and the same. Margaret had been a widow for 10 years, her husband gone from a sudden heart attack, and she had thrown herself into church leadership, becoming the voice that rallied against every proposed change to the traditional values the congregation held dear. Oliver knew the script by heart because he had lived it since he was 16, when he first realized the feelings he had for his best friend were not just admiration. He had burned the diary that confessed those early thoughts, but the memory of his mother's casual remarks about sinners and abominations had lodged deep. As they walked back to Elijah's modest rental house, Oliver felt the familiar knot in his stomach. Tomorrow is the big vote on the new youth program, and Mom is leading the opposition to including any discussion of diversity. Elijah nodded, but his eyes held understanding, not judgment. "We take it one day at a time, Ollie." That night, Oliver lay awake in his childhood bedroom, the walls still covered with faded posters from youth camp, the Bible on the nightstand, a silent reminder of the divide. Downstairs, Margaret sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her mind replaying the service. She had seen the way Oliver glanced at the new teacher during the sermon, and the knowledge she had carried alone for over a decade pressed heavier than ever. She had found the diary all those years ago, hidden under his mattress, the pages filled with confusion and longing. Instead of confronting him, she had doubled down on her public stance, hoping the visibility of her disapproval would shield him from the same pain that had destroyed her younger brother Robert. Robert had come out in the 90s, the church had turned its back, the family followed, and he had taken his own life at 24 in a lonely apartment in Raleigh. Margaret had never spoken of the guilt that still woke her at night, the promise she made at his grave to protect any child of hers from that fate, no matter the cost to her own soul. The next morning at breakfast, Margaret set a plate of eggs in front of Oliver, her smile practiced and warm on the surface. "Did you enjoy the service yesterday?" Oliver nodded, forcing a bite down. "It was powerful, Mom." She studied him for a moment, then turned to the sink. "Good. We need strong voices against the changes trying to creep in." Oliver left for work, the words burning, but he called Elijah on his lunch break, the conversation a lifeline. "I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending." Elijah's voice was calm. "Then don't. But when you are ready, I am right here." Their relationship had grown through small, brave steps, coffee dates disguised as mentoring sessions, weekend hikes where they could hold hands without fear, and late-night talks about what a future might look like if Oliver ever stepped into the light. Elijah shared stories of his own, coming out, the initial rejection from his conservative family, the slow rebuilding of bridges, and the freedom that came with living truthfully. Oliver listened and longed for that freedom, but the image of his mother's face at the pulpit held him back. By the following weekend, Oliver and Elijah had carved out a routine that felt both thrilling and terrifying. They drove to a quiet state park an hour away, where the trails were empty enough for honest conversation. Elijah unpacked a picnic, and they sat on a blanket under the pines. "Tell me what you dream about when the church stuff isn't weighing you down," Oliver asked. Elijah smiled, the sunlight catching in his dark hair. "A life where we don't have to hide." A home, maybe even kids if that is what we want. Teaching without worrying that parents will pull their kids because the teacher is gay. Oliver leaned back, the words painting a picture he had never allowed himself to imagine fully. I want that too, but every time I think about telling Mom, the words stick. Elijah reached for his hand. You do not have to do it alone. They talked for hours about their favorite books, Elijah's passion for history, and how it helped him understand that change always came with resistance. Oliver opened up about the nights he had prayed for the feelings to disappear, the guilt that followed every stolen glance at another boy in youth group. Back in Willow Creek, the church was buzzing with preparations for the community outreach vote. Margaret stood at the planning meeting, her notes crisp. We must keep our programs focused on biblical truth, she insisted, her tone leaving no room for debate. Several members clapped, but a few younger families shifted uncomfortably. Oliver arrived late, slipping into the back row beside Elijah, who had been invited as a new community member. Their eyes met briefly, the silent exchange enough to steady Oliver. After the meeting, Margaret cornered him in the hallway. You seem distracted lately. Is everything all right at work? Oliver forced a smile. Just busy, Mom. She searched his face, then patted his arm. Remember who you are. We do not bend to the world. The words landed like stones, but Oliver nodded and left to meet Elijah at the car. That night they sat on Elijah's porch, the stars bright above. I found out something today, Oliver said quietly. Mom has been collecting signatures against adding any LGBT support to the youth curriculum. Elijah listened without interrupting, his presence a safe harbor. Oliver continued, the memories flooding. When I was 16, I wrote everything down in a diary. I thought I hid it, but she must have found it. She never said a word, but after that her speeches got louder. Elijah pulled him into a hug, the warmth chasing away the chill. She might be scared for you, not against you. They stayed like that until the moon rose, talking about the small ways they had already begun to build something real. Elijah shared how his own mother had eventually come around after years of distance, the letters they exchanged, the slow thawing. Oliver felt a spark of hope, but the fear remained. The following week brought the first real test. A colleague at the accounting firm mentioned seeing Oliver and Elijah at the park the weekend before. Nothing direct, just a casual remark, but it spread through the office like wildfire. Oliver called Elijah in a panic. What if it gets back to Mom? Elijah met him after work at a neutral coffee shop, the afternoon light streaming through the windows. We face it together. Their conversation turned deep, Elijah reminding Oliver that love was not a sin but a gift. Oliver left feeling lighter, yet the internal storm raged. At home, Margaret prepared dinner, her movements efficient. I heard you have been spending time with a new teacher. Oliver froze, the fork halfway to his mouth. He is a good guy, Mom. She set the salad down, her voice even. Just be careful who you associate with. The church has standards. Oliver ate in silence, the food tasting like ash. Later in his room, he texted Elijah, the exchange replaying. The response came quickly. You are stronger than you think. The tension in the Thompson household thickened as the church vote approached. Margaret spent evenings on the phone rallying members, her laughter light when she spoke of standing firm, but Oliver caught the moments when she stared out the window, her face etched with something deeper than determination. One afternoon, he came home early and found her at the kitchen table, flipping through an old photo album. The page was open to Uncle Robert smiling at the camera, his arm around a young Margaret. Oliver had heard the stories. Robert left town after a falling out, never to return. Margaret closed the album quickly. Just reminiscing. Oliver wanted to press, but the wall between them felt too high. Meanwhile, Elijah and Oliver stole time together, building a friendship that felt like the foundation of something lasting. They volunteered at the local animal shelter, the work grounding, and the shared laughter healing. On one shift, they walked a pair of rescue dogs through the park, the leashes tangling as they talked. Elijah shared how his faith had evolved from rigid rules to a personal relationship with grace. Oliver listened, absorbing the idea that God might love him exactly as he was. Back at Elijah's place, they cooked dinner together, the simple act of chopping vegetables side by side, a quiet rebellion against the secrecy. Elijah played soft music, and they danced in the small kitchen, the moment light and free. The church meeting arrived on a humid Thursday evening. Margaret took the floor, her presentation polished. Allowing open discussion of alternative lifestyles will confuse our youth, she argued, the room responding with applause. Oliver sat beside Elijah, their shoulders brushing. After the meeting, a few members approached Margaret with praise, but Oliver overheard whispers about the new teacher. One elder mentioned seeing two men walking close at the park. Oliver felt the blood drain from his face. Elijah pulled him aside outside. Breathe. We knew this might happen. They drove to the lake, the water reflecting the streetlights. Oliver poured out his fears, the years of hiding the love he felt for Elijah, the terror of losing his mother and his community. Elijah held him, the embrace wordless but full of promise. You are not alone anymore. The next day at work, the rumors reached Oliver's boss, a mild comment about keeping personal life private. Oliver left early and met Elijah at the high school after classes. They sat in Elijah's classroom, the desks empty, the afternoon sun warm on the floor. Elijah showed him a lesson plan on civil rights movements, the parallel to their own lives clear. Oliver felt seen in a way the church had never offered. That evening, Margaret noticed his distraction at dinner. You seem distant. Oliver almost spoke, but the words caught. Just work stuff. She nodded, but her eyes lingered, the secret knowledge she carried pressing on her heart. She had protected him all these years by becoming the loudest voice against the very thing she knew lived in her son, hoping the spotlight on her would keep it off him. The cost was her own peace, but she would pay it again. Misunderstandings began to creep in as the pressure mounted. Elijah suggested they spend a weekend away at a cabin in the mountains, a chance to breathe without Willow Creek watching. Oliver hesitated, the idea thrilling yet terrifying. What if someone sees us? Elijah understood, but the hurt flickered in his eyes. I am not asking you to shout it from the rooftops, just to live a little. They compromised on a day trip, the drive filled with music and stories. At the overlook, they stood side by side, the valley stretching below. Elijah turned to Oliver. I love you. The words hung in the clear air. Oliver felt them settle deep. I love you too. The kiss that followed was gentle, the world narrowing to just them. Back home, the strain showed. A church member mentioned to Margaret that her son seemed close with a teacher. Margaret brushed it off, but inside the fear spiked. That night she sat in her room reading old letters from Robert, the pain fresh. She had failed her brother by not speaking up, and she would not fail Oliver. The next morning she doubled down at a prayer breakfast, her words sharper than ever. We must guard our children against influences that lead them astray. Oliver heard about it from a coworker, the knot in his stomach tightening. He confronted Elijah later, the conversation tense. Maybe we need to slow down. Elijah's face fell. Slow down or hide more. Oliver left angry at himself more than anything, the internal conflict tearing at him. A few days later, Marcus, Oliver's straight best friend from high school, now a youth pastor at a neighboring church, stopped by. They talked over coffee, Marcus sensing something. You know, you can tell me anything, right? Oliver almost opened up, but the habit of silence won. Marcus shared his own struggles with the church's rigid views, admitting he had begun questioning some teachings. The conversation planted a seed. Meanwhile, Elijah threw himself into teaching, creating a safe space for students who felt different. One student confided in him about bullying, and Elijah listened the role, reminding him why he had come to Willow Creek. Oliver and Elijah reconciled over a quiet dinner at Elijah's, the argument fading into understanding. They talked late into the night about identity, the way society shaped their fears, and the courage it took to choose love. Oliver shared the diary memory, the way his mother had changed afterward. Elijah listened, then said softly, maybe she is protecting you in her own way. The idea lingered, giving Oliver a new lens. At home, Margaret watched her son, the love she could not voice, wrapped in layers of pretense. She had sacrificed her authenticity to keep him safe, but the walls were cracking. Rumors spread like wildfire through Willow Creek. A parent at the school mentioned seeing Oliver and Elijah at the overlook, the story growing with each retelling. Oliver felt the stares at the grocery store, the polite smiles that no longer reached the eyes. At church the following Sunday, Margaret delivered another message on family values, her voice steady, but Oliver saw the tremor in her hands. After the service, an elder pulled her aside, the conversation hushed. Margaret nodded, but her face was pale when she returned home. Oliver asked if everything was all right. Just church business, she replied, but the lie sat heavy. Elijah faced his own challenges. A parent complained about the history lessons touching on social justice. The principal supported him, but the pressure mounted. They met at the lake, the conversation turning to the future. "What if we leave town?" Oliver asked, half joking. Elijah shook his head. "Running does not fix what is inside." Oliver knew he was right, the identity crisis deepening. He spent a night alone walking the streets, the weight of expectation crushing. Marcus called the next day, sensing the strain. They met for a hike, Marcus sharing his own doubts about the church's stance on LGBTQ issues. The talk opened a door Oliver had kept locked. Margaret found an old photo of Robert and Oliver as a baby, the resemblance striking. The guilt surged. She had known about Oliver since the diary, but her response had been to build a fortress of words, hoping it would shield him. That evening she almost spoke, but the habit held. Oliver noticed her distraction. "Mom, you seem tired." She smiled, the mask perfect. "Just praying for our community." The lie hurt more each time. Elijah and Oliver shared a quiet evening, the support mutual, the love growing stronger through the storm. Elijah reminded Oliver of his worth, the words sinking in. The crisis peaked when a church member directly asked Margaret if her son was spending too much time with a new teacher. She laughed it off, but inside the panic rose. She called a private meeting with the elders, the conversation tense. The protection she had built was fraying. Oliver, meanwhile, reached a breaking point at work. A colleague made a pointed remark. He left early and drove to Elijah, the tears coming as he arrived. Elijah held him, the comfort steady. "We will face whatever comes." The night brought clarity. Oliver, deciding he could no longer live divided. The church announced a special gathering to address community concerns, the air thick with anticipation. Margaret prepared her remarks, the words she had spoken for years now tasting like ash. Oliver and Elijah attended together, the decision a small act of courage. As the meeting began, whispers followed them. Margaret took the floor, but her usual fire faltered. Oliver watched, his heart breaking for her. After the meeting, Oliver confronted her at home, the conversation long overdue. "Mom, I need to tell you something." Margaret listened, the truth she had known for years finally spoken. Oliver poured out his heart, the love for Elijah, the pain of hiding. Margaret sat silent, tears in her eyes. Elijah waited outside, the support unwavering. The three sat together, the air charged. Margaret spoke of Robert, her voice breaking, the story Oliver had never fully heard. The shunning, the suicide, the guilt. "I pretended to hate what I feared would take you too," she admitted. "But I've always loved you exactly as you are." The revelation shifted everything, the pretense cracking. The next day at the lake, Oliver, Elijah, and Margaret walked together, the conversation healing. Elijah shared his perspective, the family dynamic changing. Oliver felt the weight lift, the growth beginning. The church gathering approached, the tension building. Oliver and Elijah prepared, the decision to stand together made. Margaret wrestled with her role, the protection she had offered, now ready to transform into truth. The internal conflicts resolved into resolve, the pivotal choice clear. Oliver embraced his identity, the fear giving way to strength. Elijah stood as the steady partner, the relationship deepening through trial. Margaret faced her past, the sacrifice, now a bridge to honesty. The special gathering filled the sanctuary, every seat taken, the atmosphere electric. Margaret stepped to the pulpit, the congregation expectant. She began with her usual stance, but the words halted. "I have pretended for years," she said, her voice steady at first. The room shifted. She spoke of Robert, the love, the loss, the church's role in his pain. Then the truth that had driven her. "I knew about Oliver, and I built a wall of words to protect him." Gasps rippled. "But the real reason, the one that will change everything, is this." She held up old letters, the evidence of the senior pastor's involvement in Robert's shunning to cover his own past connection. The pastor sat frozen, the congregation falling into stunned silence, the hypocrisy laid bare. Oliver and Elijah stood, the support visible. The room remained quiet, the shock profound. Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength. "Love is not the enemy. Fear is." The meeting dissolved into murmurs, the leaders speechless. Outside the church, the three embraced the moment, raw and real. The aftermath began conversations, starting the community forced to confront its own truths. Oliver felt free, the identity crisis resolved, the growth evident. Elijah stood proud, the relationship affirmed. Margaret found peace, the pretense ended, the sacrifice honored. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek changed in subtle ways. Some members reached out, others distanced, but the family unit grew stronger. Oliver and Elijah moved in together, the home filled with laughter and honest conversation. Margaret visited often, the bond rebuilt on truth. They attended a smaller, inclusive service, the healing continuing. Oliver thrived at work, the authenticity shining. Elijah inspired students, the impact lasting. Margaret volunteered with youth programs, the focus now on compassion. The journey had tested them all, the conflicts, the misunderstandings, the revelations forging deeper connections. Oliver reflected on the path from fear to freedom, Elijah by his side. Margaret embraced her role as ally, the past no longer defining. The community continued to debate, but the three stood united, the love triumphant. True or false? A parent's hidden love can truly protect a child from prejudice, or does honesty always heal the wounds of pretense faster?